Hello. Welcome to another battleship inspection in World of Warships. And we're looking at the Slava. And the overall thoughts on Slava. I'm personally not really a fan of this ship anymore. And I used to be a fan of the Slava when I first got the Slava. And there's kind of a few issues that I have with the Slava. Number one, a lot of the uniqueness of the ship has been replaced by Bungo and Wisconsin specifically, and those are two fairly new battleships. They're not each wholly replacing your gimmick, but they're both partially replacing your gimmick, and then they also offer other very advantageous features that Slava does not get. Number two is the survivability on Slava is some of the worst of all Tier 10 battleships. The hull is. I think you can make a strong case that Slava has the worst Tier 10 battleship hull in the game. Because you kind of have like all of the weakness of like a Republic hull, where like almost the entire thing is made out of paper, but then you have this above water citadel. Your hull is basically the exact same profile as the Kremlin, so there's quite a bit of slope on the Citadel, which is giving you a bit more effective armor thickness than just kind of like the armor plating shown in port. But it's not great. You're going to start taking Citadels a solid like 2 to 3 kilometers further than Kremlin does when you're flat in this thing. Now the nose, the ass are 25 millimeters, but practically speaking, you can't really get Citadels straight through the nose and ass. This thing is very easy to cheek under the guns because the Citadel is not super thick, but you kind of can't really get Citadel through the nose and ass, and that is because Slava actually has hidden armor plates inside the nose and I think the ass, if I'm not wrong on that. So basically, there's one reason and one reason only in theory to play Slava, and that is the guns, the guns, the guns. The guns have, I would say, basically three things that used to make them completely unique. Number one is the shell velocity. It's extremely fast. I do believe it is still the fastest shell velocity of all battleships in the game at long range. I think even like the Preußen and the Repub, I think once you get to a certain range, even those ships still have worse flight time than Slava. Slava also has this weird feature where the shells have a magical shell drag basically, so they don't really like lose hardly any speed at range. So you have these super fast shells, and that is coupled with insane amounts of AP pen. Even compared to something like Republic, you're maintaining something like 80 plus more millimeters of penetration at longer range. Now, of course, you can also combine that with the shell velocity at range. Shell velocity at range obviously also means a shallower impact angle, right? A smaller impact angle, which of course also means more effective penetration. So it's not just that the raw AP pen is very high; it's that the AP pen is decreased the least of all tier 10 battleships at long range because the shells are coming in so flat, right? And then the last is the dispersion. Slava at very long range is still the most accurate battleship in the game. Now, there's like kind of I suppose, a bit of a caveat to that with the Bungo with the spotter plane up. Probably technically has a bit better dispersion than Slava. But Bungo doesn't really have very good AP penetration performance at range. So, what is this all combining for? Well, in theory, these gimmicks, the super fast shells, the super long range of the guns, the super high AP pen, the super flat shell trajectory, this is all making you a specialist at exactly one thing, and that is getting citadels on battleships that other battleships could never citadel. And I am stressing on battleships because obviously this kind of AP pen performance is so much overkill against every single cruiser in the game. In fact, there's a strong case to be made that Slava's shell flight time, the shell speed at impact, is actually realistically in many situations making you a lot worse against flat broadside cruisers, many of them. And that is just because, you know, it's not that Slava has too much pen. I often hear this floated around that like the guns have too much pen. That's literally not a thing. What they have is they have too much velocity, right? The shells are so fast that yes, they may impact the enemy, you know, the Des Moines Citadel at closer range and arm, but the problem is they don't fuse and detonate inside the ship, right? So realistically, against flat broadside cruisers, there's a lot of way more consistent battleships than you. Something like Vermont, really even Montana, Wisconsin, I would argue are like on the whole much more consistent at deleting flat broadside cruisers. Some of the super thick ones, Slava is still the best at because of the vertical dispersion, and that is the component of the dispersion that's kind of like the most special on Slava. When you compare the Slava to something like the Wisconsin, Wisconsin actually maintains a better horizontal dispersion, really at quite a long range. I want to say you have to get like well beyond 20 kilometers before the Slava gains better horizontal dispersion against Wisconsin. But Slava starts getting better vertical dispersion against Wisconsin at pretty short range. I want to say even like at around 8 or 9 kilometers, the Slava is already gaining better vertical dispersion than something like Wisconsin, and that is because the rate of increase on your dispersion ellipse is in as far as I'm aware kind of like the lowest in the game. What I mean by that is a lot of battleships, you know, they'll typically gain something like 6-7 meters of vertical dispersion for every kilometer you increase the gun range, and Slava only gains about 4 meters of vertical dispersion for every kilometer you increase the gun range. So while it is basically as vertically accurate as something like Wisconsin at, you know, super close range, you know, maybe again I think it's about 8 kilometers where they have basically comparable vertical dispersion. The Wisconsin does in fact gain that, you know, around 6 meters worse vertical dispersion per kilometer, while Slava only gains about 4. So the farther out you get, the more Slava kind of leads the pack, even against ships like Wisconsin. But again, this is stressing strictly the vertical dispersion. Now, when you get closer range, the Slava actually does not have super special horizontal dispersion really at all. In fact, at a range of even like 10 kilometers, you basically have the same horizontal dispersion as like GK Preußen, which, you know, I think most of us would consider not the greatest horizontal dispersion. So, why is that relevant? Well, at very long range is totally irrelevant because you're still the most accurate battleship in the game. You know, barring Bungo spotter plane, right, at super long range. You see how easy these shells are to lead on something like a Bismarck at 20 kilometers, right? Wisconsin, we would be leading him by like a solid half or more of a boat length. But the reason why that horizontal dispersion compared to other like hyper accurate ships like Wisconsin or Bungo really matters at close range is because you don't have overmatch, right? You have 406s, 406 millimeter guns. So you can, you know, overmatch bows of, you know, something like a Des Moines, you know, Park nose in, right? You can overmatch his bow. But the problem is at really close range, not having the greatest horizontal dispersion becomes quite noticeable actually. A ship like Wisconsin much more consistently punishes bow in targets than Slava, and that is leading us to kind of the big caveat to this gun performance, which is that it kind of only punishes broadsides, you know, comparably, right, compared to the other tier 10 battleships. Slava is one of the worst battleships at tier 10 against nose-in targets at close range. Now, also, we can talk about how the AA is theoretically good, but there is another caveat to that, which is like Kremlin. The Slava has the kind of AA mounts that are made out of paper, so that basically that one bomb hit from that CV basically wiped like a third of my AA ability. And, you know, of course, you know, he's not affected. His planes don't magically lose strike power over the course of the game. You and your Slava will just lose AA performance over the course of the game. Really fucking cool dynamic wargaming. We love that one. But the problem is, like, this ship is just covered. The whole deck is 32, and then the nose and ass parts of the deck are 25, right? So kind of every HE spammer in the game eats this thing alive. We could talk about the gimped healing as well. You get the same healing scheme as Kremlin, where you only get 3 charges base. So with the skill, you only get 4. Now, I do run improved repair party readiness on Slava. I think it's just, like, a no-brainer skill on most battleships. But because Slava is so inherently untanky, particularly to HE spam, you eat a lot of damage in the Slava that would not damage anything like a Kremlin, a GK, really even a Montana. And because of that, you it's hard to get to that fifth heal a lot of the time. I do still run it because there are games where it matters. But now you see there that we're able to Citadel a flat broadside bongo up close, which is actually quite difficult for most ships to do. But at this kind of range, I want to stress at something like 6 kilometers, like something like a Preußen or even a GK straight up basically has just better guns than this thing. The closer and closer you get, the less special Slava's dispersion becomes. And, while it does still maintain a slight vertical dispersion edge over most normal battleships like GK Preußen, I would certainly at this kind of range much rather have Preußen guns than Slava guns. And that is going to kind of bring me to like the overall issue that I have with Slava is I just don't think it really suits my play style. The way that I like to play the game, where I've said this many times in these videos, I will kite and farm from spawn if I have to, but I would rather not. And the problem is the Slava is incredibly incentivized to farm from spawn, because you have no resistance to HE. You have really no resistance to AP. You have a very vulnerable Citadel at even medium range, and you have gimped healing compared to all other battleships. Excuse me. So this kind of combination of features makes you almost uniquely bad at pushing in. I would argue maybe the ship like Bungo has a worse hull to push in, but Bungo can push in with its demonic HE and its demonic, and his overmatch, so it's kind of inherently a bit more suited to pushing in. He's either like able to Citadel midway straight through the bow, and that there are times where Slava's really fast shells and that standard battleship fuse time can come in handy. And it does typically come in real handy when you are shooting ships where like you're fusing the shells on the bow, but then you have the shell velocity to punch through and pen them, which is definitely like something that shouldn't really be overlooked. But I would say this is like kind of the typical Slava game in my experience. You kind of look to play central positioning, right? Because you can hit the whole map. And yes, I do think you absolutely should take range mod on Slava for multiple reasons. But you can kind of hit the whole map, right? 53 plane kills. I mean, the autism was autisming on this midway. Pretty cool. But yeah, like as you could see, pretty decent AA, and then we really only started getting really fucked on once he hit a couple of bomb drops on me. And you could like, even though I couldn't show you the percentage of AA mounts we lost, I'm pretty sure it was pretty obvious. We went from like wiping squadrons to like kind of struggling. But this is kind of the Slava experience to me. You kind of park middle because you can hit the whole map. You have the pen, the velocity to hit the whole map, the range to hit the whole map. You look for broadsides. This game, nobody really wanted to give broadsides, aside from Bismarck, which we don't Citadel. And then, like, this is the thing with Slava, is the second you're firing at a ship that you're not going to Citadel, whether it be just like, maybe a 45-degree battleship at long range, whether it, maybe it's a German battleship, right? Kremlin with too much, side plating, too thick side plating at long range. Then you're just also, like, not very good at shooting broadsides either, because of the damage output being so gimped. And that is kind of going to my full circle issue with that I have with Slava. Number one, it doesn't really fit my playstyle because it's so bad at pushing in compared to not all but most tier 10 battleships. And then number two, this gimmick of hyper accurate guns has basically just been repeated in the Bungo and the Wisconsin. And those ships also have much better guns at medium and close range because they either have improved damage output, which, well, first of all, both of them straight up have, but Wisconsin has the reload booster. They both have basically a better hull, Bungo being almost impossible to Citadel. Of course, Bungo gets overmatch. It gets like Conqueror level HE, of course. So really your sole gimmick on this thing that is still unique, the unique gimmick that Slava still has is this ability to Citadel broadside battleships at extreme range. And that is basically the sole gimmick that it has, because it's kind of lost the railgun velocity, because, you know, they came out with Repub, they came out with Preußen, right? These ships basically have like similar velocity. It's a bit worse at very long range, but it's similar. So the concept of Bungo even has similar shell velocity at medium to long range. So this gimmick of laser accurate shells, Wisconsin and Bungo have replaced that, and they're better ships overall. And then the gimmick of railgun shells that take like very little skill to lead has also basically been replaced by a lot of ships, if you think about it. I mean, if you want to think about like the flight time around 20 kilometers, you know, Slava is like really no longer all that special. A lot of these, you know, newer ships that have come out since Slava, it's like you've got Repub, you've got Preußen, you've got Colombo, you've got Bungo. It's like they're all they're all less than a second behind Slava at say 20 kilometers. So the X factor of this ship is the performance really beyond 20 kilometers of range. And that's not really how I personally like to play battleships. And I fully recognize that that last gripe I have with Slava is a me thing. Like, there are people who, when they play Republic, they love sitting at 20 to 23 kilometers and slinging shells across the map, right? If you're that kind of guy, like if you play Repub and you love Republic for the gun range and you love, you know, chucking shells at people beyond 20 kilometers, then I would say if you love that play style for whatever reason, then I would say like Slava's a great, you know, probably one of the best battleships, because the guns are very very satisfying. The flight time, the accuracy, uh, it's kind of just the overall package of the Slava that is a problem. And you know, it's so interesting because if you watch like some older YouTube reviews of Slava, people seem to think it was overpowered, which is really interesting because basically battleships are only overpowered when they fuck on other battleships. I don't know if you've noticed this, like like Libtard. Uh, the community finally realized, like I said in the Schlieffen video, that secondary battleships are stupid, but it took a secondary battleship that is uniquely good against battleships to make that happen. Uh, and you know, I'll still like hear people complain about Slava when it citadels them across the map, and it's like this ship, to me, is legitimately one of the few tier 10 battleships in the game that is like truly balanced. Because it is laser accurate, and it has railgun shell velocity and long range. All of those are really nice things, but it has very poor damage per shell. It has one of the worst hulls in the game of all the tier 10 battleships. I do really think you can make a very strong case that it's the worst battleship hull at tier 10, combined with the grim survivability. Uh, and it's just very very interesting. So at a range like this, 22.5 kilometers, we actually, believe it or not, have the ability to citadel something like a Vermont, which is crazy. And this is kind of the sole gimmick. Now we're not Dispersion and cooperate, but yeah, something like a broadside Vermont at basically max range, like this thing really does have the penetration to citadel, and that is the gimmick of Slava. That super high pen also does kind of come in handy against like slightly angled battleships, right? Uh, you know, if you've got something like a Yamato, and you can citadel it flat in Monty, but like the second it goes 20 degrees less than broadside, you non-pen it, right? Then Slava is going to, of course, still have the pen to citadel that, but you don't have really good damage output, even considering the accuracy of the shells. And kind of the second somebody aims, you're in one of the worst tier 10 battleships. Angles, sorry. The second an enemy player angles, you're in one of the worst tier 10 battleships in the game. And, you know, you could make the argument about Wisconsin for that same thing, but I don't think it's quite a fair comparison. And a lot of the time, because this game is so shit, I mean, like, this salvo right here, like, there's no universe with that aim point that I shouldn't be getting citadels on a Schlieffen at that angle. See, we even got a torpedo protection hit, which at that angle, flat broadside, Wargaming counted that as a non-pen, right? Basically, we went through the torp protection and couldn't citadel them, which is kind of insane. Um, But basically, to me, in my battleship, when I value, I kind of value like two things. I value consistent guns, and I value the ability to tank and play positionally by tanking. Now, here you see a really interesting feature of Slava, which is that if your aim is not perfect, you get zero damage. Uh, and basically, why did I get 7 overpens and only 1 pen? I got 7 overpens and 1 pen because I aimed like literally 2 or 3 meters too high. In something like a Vermont, if I had aimed that well, I would have dev struck that Salem, no questions asked. And in something like a Montana, I would probably would have dev struck that Salem, no questions asked. Because they would have slightly worse accuracy, which would enable me to get more citadels, right? This is actually something you saw when the Wisconsin came out. The people who thought it was worse than Montana or not as good per salvo as Montana basically were outing themselves as bad aimers. And you can see there, like, how little your aim has to be off to troll yourself in Slava. Like, that is not dispersion fucking me. That is not artillery bug. That is I aimed legitimately 1 or 2 meters too high, and because the ship is so accurate is in the vertical dispersion department, instead of like 3 or 4 citadels and a dev strike, I get 1 citadel. Basically, because one shell went slightly lower than the rest and got a sit, right? So you're because you can't really push in and because you can't really tank, you are a bit, and because you have very pitiful damage output against anyone that angles, you are very team reliant in the Slava compared to other battleships. It's almost really hard to think of a battleship that's more team reliant. For now, I want to be clear that this is team reliance for winning, for game impact. Uh, Obviously, you don't need a team to sit in Slava at 24 kilometers and spam across the map, right? Obviously, I'm not trying to say that, but your game impact in the Slava is really dependent on two things. One is your team giving any kind of pressure to the enemy team to establish something like a crossfire for you. And then two is spotting. And when you have a team like mine where basically all of your destroyers are completely retarded, your sub is retarded. I mean, my sub is like basically just AFK next to his Zao, right? Um, and because my destroyers are retarded and so is my sub, there's not really any cross map spotting for most of this game. So I kind of would just rather be in any other battleship. Like, realistically, in the Slava, if you are not getting broadside targets beyond 20 kilometers, there's kind of no value to playing this ship over anything, any other battleship, right? And I think that is ultimately my issue. Now, I want to caveat this by saying that if you play in a division with a greasy carrier player, okay? Let's say your best buddy in World of Warships is a carrier main. Slava, to me, almost instantly becomes one of the most toxic and unfair battleships in the entire game to me. If you pair this thing with a carrier, it is so unbelievably toxic because the carrier is giving both the spotting and the crossfire, and then you have the velocity, accuracy, and penetration to Citadel even battleships basically across the map, right? Um, Here's just another like interesting salvo. Like, if you can see where those shells are clumped in and where I got the Citadel, I basically landed 4 shells on the exact same pixel, but there's only 1 Citadel. Again, would have been a dev strike in Vermont, and this is kind of the problem. And it's also very possible that basically 3 of those overpens went through the Citadel because the shells are so fast, right? Um, and the problem is, like, there's too many targets where the Slava is not as consistent as really even a Montana, because the Montana does have more shells, so if the enemy slightly angles, you slightly miss aim, you still get big damage. But here we're going to see the gimmick finally rearing its head. Vermont at 25.5 kilometers. And you see the angle here? Not even perfectly broadside. He's angled 20 degrees out of broadside. I mean, that's pretty fucking cool. There is still no ship that can do that. This is the only ship in the fucking game that is going to 40k of Vermont at 26 kilometers. It's the only ship in the game that is capable of that. The issue is that the question you have to ask yourself is, how often does that opportunity present itself? How often does an enemy battleship with an above water citadel sail basically flat broadside to you at beyond, say, 18 kilometers, right? Because inside of like 20 kilometers, Wisconsin would citadel that guy for more damage, basically, right? So beyond 20 kilometers, flat broadside battleship, exposed citadel, and he doesn't touch his keyboard when you shoot at him. That is the situation where Slava is still unrivaled. But how many times does that situation happen? And my issue is, I would say maybe once a game. The last game, right? The replay just before this, as always, back-to-back replays. I had multiple people sailing flat broadside to me, if you recall. But what ships were they? Well, they were Kearsarge, which basically cannot be citadel by Slava. The citadel is perfectly even with the waterline, and unlike Montana's waterline citadel, it doesn't have an overmatchable roof on the citadel. So you kind of need like unicorn dispersion to citadel something like a Kearsarge, unless you have 460 plus millimeter guns. And then a Bismarck, who basically has no citadel, right? So that's the problem. And then you saw this game, like, I had a perfectly flat broadside Schlieffen at 16 kilometers. The game just basically completely trolled me. I then had a flat broadside Salem at like 12 kilometers. The game completely trolled me again. Earlier I had the Salem and I barely misaimed, so I didn't, that's not Slava, that's me. That's my bad aim, not Slava being bad. And then I finally got the unicorn moment where Vermont, his citadel is a bit out of the water. And I have the pen to reach him. Pen to citadel him. I have the velocity to catch him. And he has the lack of IQ points to angle. So, how many times does that situation happen per game? I would say maybe one. I would say probably like once per game you get that Slava moment, trademark. The trademark Slava moment where you like get 3 or 4 black ribbons on a battleship across the fucking map. And that is really cool. And it's really, really satisfying. The problem is you are very often playing one of the worst battleships in the game for like 80% of the match to then get to an opportunity where you're the best battleship, right? Because against flat broadside targets beyond 20 kilometers, you're still probably the best in the game. Battleships beyond 20 for sure. Some cruisers, if they're like fast, then the shell velocity matters, right? Where of course running Kuznetsov goes without saying. But you're kind of just chasing those moments in the Slava, and you're ending up with a worse ship than most in the game. I would say a solid 80% of the time. You don't really have anything going for you in the tanking department in the Slava. You don't really have anything going for you in just the raw damage output department in the Slava. You don't, of course, have like any overmatch to get consistency that way. You have this good AA, but kind of like 2 good HE salvos wipes most of it, basically. And then you have this really, really bad hull and the Gamteeling. And I don't really just like think that I can recommend like spending research points on the Slava. Like, again, there's basically 2 caveats to this. Like I've mentioned, one would be you really enjoy like Republic 20 plus kilometer spam. Then okay, maybe you'll like Slava. Or you are, you div with like piece of shit carrier player. And then, yeah, it's probably like Slava div with the carrier might be the best battleship at tier 10 in the fucking game. Like, it's legitimately hard to think of a better battleship in this game than Slava div with a carrier. Like, I have literally had games in Slava. Basically, I only play Slava these days. Aside from this review, I kind of haven't played Slava in months, and basically the only time I ever play the Slava is if I'm divved with a carrier or a hybrid player, because then all of a sudden your ability to hit broadsides across the map actually matters. I've had games in Slava where you literally get your team has 2 kills 2.5 minutes into the game because your carrier player like spots the enemy carrier and he's a moron who moves at the start of the game, and you literally snipe the enemy carrier in the first minute of the game, right? Or you just like spot a Montana coming out of spawn and you triple sit him at 25 kilometers, right? You spot a cruiser coming out of spawn and you just dev strike it because you have the velocity and accuracy to punch him. Um, and you're just too team reliant most of the time, especially when you play the ship solo. Don't really enjoy it solo at all. And then if I'm divvying with a destroyer player, I would much rather have a ship that is better against destroyers or more consistently punishes cruisers, maybe with overmatch. Um, I there's other there's ships that I'd rather play Poison than Slava. I'm just gonna say it straight up. I think it's in most situations a better battleship. It's tankier when played at medium to close range. The guns are more consistent overall against most targets. It's kind of a weird thing to say. My team is actually gonna, just talking about this game. My team is actually like hilariously gonna come unbelievably close to losing this game. We're up. We're gonna win in 1 minute if nobody dies. But my sub or my Zhao just decides to park flat broadside to this sub, so he has no ability to dodge. Uh, and then he's gonna like whiff all the airstrikes. He could have already gotten 2 sets off, right? So he's gonna die to the sub. And then it was like, okay, well that's fine. We're still up like 900 to 800. Once after this guy dies, we're still up points. We still have 2 caps to 1. These guys can both run away, right? There's 4 minutes left in the game. We win. We win with 1 cap in 1 minute. These guys can just run away. And then this Marceau that I was so proud of, man. I was so proud of him for like being the one DD that didn't suicide on our team, and he's just gonna actually just like turbo suicide for really no reason at all, not even DCP the torps. And then my sub is also going to attempt to suicide and not quite make it. Pretty unfortunate. It never fails, man. As soon as I get this feeling like one of my teammates is good, they always prove me wrong. It's so terrible. Um, I'm tired, boss. I'm just tired. This guy's talking shit because he's got 4 kills in his Marceau, and I have none, so he's talking shit. And he decides that 4 kills to 0 means he's justified in throwing the game. And so a Herculean effort by the team to throw, and Mr. 4 kills over here, unlucky. You really do you just hate to see that. It's pretty tough, pretty undeniably tough. But this is that hit on the Vermont, right? Wow. And when it happens, it is absolute neuron activation. Hitting black ribbons in Slava across the map is, to me, probably still one of the most satisfying types of damage or kills to get. Because like so much has to come together. Your aim has to be perfect. Your lead has to be perfect. And then you're like in the one ship that can punish these people. And it's super, super satisfying. I just don't think those moments, that salvo I got on Vermont, while it's fucking incredible and I love it, I'm like cackling, I'm coming in my pants. It happens like maybe once a game. Unless you're divved with the carrier player. And the problem is, a lot of games it just doesn't happen at all. Like in that first replay, the only people flat to me were people with no citadel that I could reach, right? And then you're just kind of in like a ship that can't tank, can't effectively fight angled targets. Yeah. I'm kind of ragging on Slava a bit here. Just don't really care for it. I like ships with more game impact. That's why it might sound like a crazy statement, but there's way more game impact to be had out of like a Preußen than this thing. And that's a ship that most people would probably say is pretty junk. And most people probably still think Slava is at least good or worth getting. To me, this is probably maybe the least worth getting Research Bureau ship in the game at tier 10, aside from maybe Sevastopol. Sevastopol might be the worst tier 10 ship in the game, so it's hard to say. But 100%, what are you doing getting this over Ohio? Honestly, if I reset my account today and you told me I had to, my first research bureau ship had to be Slava or um, what's the Italian one? I can't even fucking remember the name, dude. Sicilia. If I had to get Slava or Sicilia, I might get fucking Sicilia. That sounds insane because Sicilia is not worth getting at all now that Legend Mod Colombo exists. Like that would be an insane ship to buy when you could just play Legend Mod Colombo, which is like twice as good of a boat. But I would still probably get it because it can play high game impact play style in a way that Slava can't play. Slava just is not a game impact ship. It isn't. Now, obviously, you're a god tier player. You can, I mean, like you can get good game impact out of every battleship, right? I mean, I probably have like a 60 win rate in the Zao. Does that mean the Zao is a good ship? No, it means I'm pretty good at dodging and I'm okay at aiming, so I can like consistently farm 150k damage in Zao and impact the game that way. That doesn't mean you should play Zao in 2024, right? I mean, we understand, right? We understand, what's going on here. I'm just not, and like these games were decent, right? We had 158k this game. I think the last game was 150 something too, or oh no, that was damage received. 150 this game, like 150, 150k in 2 games. I only played 2 games today. I don't really enjoy this shit, man. I don't know what else to say. If you enjoy, uh, and again, like the sniper playstyle, I think you could just play Bungo. Bungo is like a way better ship than Slava overall. Yes, it's not going to citadel battleships across the map, but overall, it's so much better because it insta deletes both destroyers and cruisers with the overmatch and the accuracy. And it also completely shits on bow-in targets because you basically have like a Thunderer level salvo every time you shoot your guns because you hit 10 out of 10 HE shells and they do 7k hit, right? So, and that's kind of giving you the super, if you're craving the accuracy and you missed out on Wisconsin, it's like just get the Bungo. Like get the Bungo. Yes, it doesn't get black ribbons on battleships like Slava does, but against cruisers, it's way better. I mean, there's no comparison against cruisers, destroyers, anything that's angled. The Bungo is a way better battleship. Better at pushing in because of the concealment and the lack of citadel and the overmatch. I mean, yeah, I mean, like, I would just never play Slava voluntarily solo, really. I don't even really enjoy Bungo. I'm not, like, the sniper battleship kind of player. And that's why I like Wisconsin so much compared to this, is Wisconsin has that crazy tanking ability, so you can push in. All right, that is a lot of blabbing. Let's hop back into the port. Okay, equipment. I think basically the only real debate is maybe run prop mod. You know me, we're always running this on everything. I think range on Slava is kind of like objectively the play because you're like the only battleship in the game that citadels battleships beyond, you have a base gun range. I believe it's like 24.2 or something base gun range, something like that. 24 and a half base gun range. And like you saw with that Vermont, right? We've got a 40k salvo on that Vermont in the second replay. He would be out of my gun range if I didn't take range mod. And this is kind of like the only reason to play the ship. Like the only reason to play Slava is to shoot people across the map. If you're not shooting people across the map, then like there's no reason to play the boat. Also, the turret traverse is hot trash. So you kind of like either really want grease the gears on the captain if you're gonna run reload mod, or you run range mod. With no modifiers, we have a 45-second turret traverse time. So I would probably swap this out for prop, call it a day on that. But I 100% think you should run range mod on Slava. Absolutely. Marginally better vertical dispersion, of course, but you got that's how on the Vermont, dude. Like, you can't reach that guy without it, and that was a quarter of my damage that game, right? So, captain wise, I think probably overall, this is kind of the spec on. I mean, let's be honest, this is just like the new default battleship spec, unless you like are in a ship with that you have to take grease the gears on or something. Could take Brisk on Slava. Brisk is actually really not a bad choice on Slava because good concealment, 13.2, very good for a battleship. A long reload, right? 33.5 second reload. And you have like an okay base speed. It's not good, but it's like kind of fine. You'll go 31 knots with the speed flag, right? So I'd actually say that very, very strong choice on Slava is in fact Brisk. But AA Defense Expert can be really fucking nice, as you saw in that very first replay. Also, this skill is kind of extra good on Slava. Well, because first of all, you don't have like any improved heal cooldown or DCP cooldown or anything like Kremlin does. But also, like Kremlin, you have long range AA, right? You have the 6.6 kilometer anti air. So CVs are kind of by default in your AA range for like an extra 5 to 10 seconds every time they drop you compared to standard battleships. You get more value out of this. It's another reason why it's like a mega skill on Kremlin as well. This is just my Kremlin captain. I think it's a very good captain on Slava. Like I said, Brisk, pretty damn solid pick as well. But that AA skill is so hard to give up because about half your games will have a carrier. You're a really easy target in Slava because you're very long, you're very immaneuverable, you're very easy to drop, right? You have shit torque protection too. We can talk about that. 29% compared to, I think Kremlin has something like a 45 ish. I want to say Kremlin has like a 45 torque, 46, yeah. So way worse torque protection than Kremlin as well. You get fucked very hard by torps, especially CV torps in this thing. This is probably like overall, I think still a very good build. And again, like you only have 4 heals with emergency repair expert. So while you're not an inherently tanky ship, like you'll always make use of that 5th heal if you can get to it. Then we can look at the armor and talk about how much worse it is than Kremlin. And this is the armor, man. It's pretty rough. I said multiple times, and I think it's probably true. Maybe the worst tier 10 battleship armor. I'm thinking let's look at these. What has worse armor at tier 10? Yeah, none of them. Yeah. Incomparable unironically basically has better armor than you. Because you have like the same size nose, but you have the nice deck. So if you're angled in comp is like not even really worse than Slava. Is the armor shit. I mean, the problem is to HEs. Like that's the biggest problem with the Slava is like, yeah, you have the really small superstructure, right? Like Kremlin, you have kind of the same superstructure, but Kremlin has the 60mm deck that like basically no cruiser in the game can pen you on the deck, right? So Kremlin's unpennable surface area from shells arcing in from cruisers, it's basically like you can pen superstructure. If you have 203s, you can pen nose and ass, but like over half the boat is 60mm or more, protection. So the problem is Slava a 1, it is kind of the same Citadel profile as Kremlin, but just you can see substantially less armor. I think it's 50mm less, right? Yeah, 360mm less in both places. So yeah, effectively this is probably more like 400, but 400 is not that great. So you have the very above water, not super thick Citadel, but you also have the entire ship basically gets penned by all cruisers. So you're one of like the least tanky battleships overall at this tier. It's and even like compared to like we can compare it to Bungo, it's kind of the same thing because you have the 25 nose and ass, the 32 deck everywhere, right? But then the difference would be that a ship like Bungo just like doesn't have a Citadel basically, right? It just kind of doesn't have one, so you can go flat and not blow up. Like you go flat in Slava at 10 kilometers and like everything blows you up basically, as it should. Let's be real. That's how every battleship should blow up if it goes flat. So you go flat when you blow up. You have no ability to bow tank because you're 25 bow. You have no ability to be resilient to HE spam because you're 32 or 25 everywhere on the deck. And then in a slugfest at close range, you have like, I think the worst damage output of all tier 10 battleships. I think it's the worst. And then at close range, your improved dispersion is not really doing anything for you because it's not that much better than, like again, your horizontal dispersion at 10 kilometers is like the same as Poison, right? And you have better vertical. So it is not really a ship that you can almost ever push in with. It suffers heavy when you push in. And I like to push in, so I'm not like a big fan of the Slava. I think, it's lame, it's stale. It is overhyped. We'll look at Ohio next, but Ohio is still just like kind of the only tier 10 Research Bureau battleship really worth getting because it's the only thing that like does anything with consistency that's different and good. I do think it's like way overhyped, especially with the Vermont changes that went live a while ago. But Slava, I don't like. I legitimately think I will personally never get Sicilia because I have Legmont Colombo, and like we talked about in the Colombo review, uh, it's a way better ship than Sicilia, and then Sicilia has a smoke gimmick, but like probably half the games you play Colombo, you don't even touch the smoke anyway, maybe once. So it's a very dubious gimmick to have. But I do think that like at least that ship is probably for my play style more fun. So, gun to my head, if you said reset your account and get Slava or Sicilia first, I'd probably actually go Sicilia. I don't really enjoy the ship at all. I find it very, very boring. Guns are satisfying when people go flat at range, but it doesn't happen all that often. Overall, quite a boring battleship. I 100% would not spend research points on this. I mean, there's multiple like Legimons that I think are more worth. Even some of the tier nines, really like Illinois, dude. I mean, like I would rather probably play like Illinois than Slava, even into tier 10 overall. It's at least it's interesting, right? I don't really play tier 9 hardly at all, but at least it's interesting, right? Paulo Emilio, interesting. Siegfried, bad ship that's interesting. Yeah. All right. Well, let's stop rambling and we'll end it there. That'll do it for the Slava. We'll see you in the next one for Ohio. Thank you for watching.